Hello, and welcome to today's event, Building Empathy and Emotional Intelligence into the Workplace. My name is Megan McCarty, and I'm co-chair of the Society for Scholarly Publishing's Community Engagement Committee. Today's event, part of SSP's Professional Development Spotlight Series, is brought to you by the Raleigh-Durham Regional Committee, chaired by me and Molly Hanson. Our committee members include Lindsay Best-Miller, Annie Gehring, Tricia Hudson, Dr. Shavi Sharan, Kasha Rapeta, Britt Stamey, and Phil Bogdan. Before we get started, I have just a few housekeeping items to review. This discussion will be recorded. Your phone will be muted automatically in consideration of our speakers and your fellow participants. Please use the Q&A feature to send questions to the panelists. The chat feature is also available if you want to say hello to the panelists or to the other attendees, or to flag any technical issues you might experience. Finally, please remember the SSP Code of Conduct and be respectful to your colleagues and the speakers in chat and in your comments. It's now my pleasure to introduce our speakers. Our first speaker is Dr. Heather Lee, co-founder and partner with Developmental Associates, and she'll be speaking about the significance of emotional intelligence in the workplace. Next, we'll hear from Laura Peterson, Vice President of Global Talent and Organization Development at RTI International, and she'll be speaking about empathy as an active inclusion, as well as perspective seeking as an intentional and inclusive practice. Finally, Orshi Kosish, Vice President of Human Resources at Research Square, will provide practical examples of Research Square's initiatives that prioritize empathy in the workplace. So Heather, thank you so much, and go ahead and take it away.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to sharing with you why emotional intelligence is so important to us in what we do every single day, and why you should care. I'd like to start off by something that's more interactive, and I want you to think about a coworker you believe is less effective. What makes them less effective in terms of the actual behaviors? Are they constantly interrupting when others are speaking? Do they show up late? Are they complainers? Do they not respond to emails? So if you would take a moment and just in chat, just share what was an example of behavior of an underperforming employee or coworker that you work with, and that'll give us some point of discussion for going forward. So take a second and jot some things down in chat. What's an example of underperformance in somebody that you work with? Don't be shy. Thank you. Ignoring general requests. That's a big one. What else?
I think Kimberly has a great one, doesn't take action promptly and usually finds someone else to do their work for them.
Okay, great. Maybe I'm not seeing all of them.
That was in the Q&A.
Okay, yep. Thank you. Yeah, whichever platform, apathy, right? So when we come up with a list, and this is an activity I do every time I do training on emotional intelligence, I usually get about 20 items, 25 items from people of underperforming behaviors. And what's unique about those underperforming behaviors is they're not typically related to technical skills. They're not related to things. Every once in a while, it's a missing piece of knowledge. But almost always, if there's 20 items on the list, 19 of them are behaviors directly related to emotional intelligence. And so that's why I want to talk about this today and help you understand the difference between IQ and EQ. IQ is very much focused on the ability to acquire and apply knowledge and skills. And there's a minimum level of IQ necessary for different occupations. But it accounts for only 6 to 25% of performance within a career. So, it varies depending on the study, but we know consistently once you get into the career, IQ is not sufficient for success. So then what other things come into play? Well, personality is a factor as well, but EQ is the ability to recognize, understand, and manage our emotions. And research suggests that 1/3 to 1/2 of career success is attributable to emotional intelligence. So practically, what is emotional intelligence? It's a set of emotional and social skills that are the difference between school smarts and street smarts. It's the capacity to support your ability to set and achieve personal and professional goals, whatever they may be. And it's the ability to tune into the world, to read situations and connect with others while taking charge of your own life. Okay, so that's the official definition. But practically, there are ways to think about this. If you want to understand yourself better and your reactions to situation, what motivates, upsets, and energizes you, that's emotional intelligence. If you want to communicate more effectively, that's emotional intelligence. If you want to work with others interpersonally more effectively, that's emotional intelligence. If you want to make better decisions, that's emotional intelligence. If you want to manage stress, change, and the unexpected better, that's emotional intelligence. And so there's a big bucket of skills that are applicable in terms of emotional intelligence. Lots of research has been done in this space. And when they looked at average performers in an organization in a study, and then they compared it to people that were evaluated as above average, what they found was that the stars performed better on 4 emotional intelligence skills, and there was no difference on IQ and technical skills. So that supports the concept that IQ gets you into a space, but it isn't sufficient to keep you at a high performing level. What really separates out people once they get into a position are those emotional intelligence skills. So you already have emotional intelligence. It originates deep in your brain. And the question is how much? And so I want you to think about, here are 2 examples. Who knew there was a show on Discovery Channel called Man versus Bear? I had no idea. And then this other picture is from a friend's house in Asheville in Biltmore Forest. That was a bear last spring looking through her dining room window. And what we know, and can you tell I'm fixated on bears a little bit, but we're hardwired to respond to risks with a fight, flight, or freeze response under stress. And so I'm using bear to provoke or evoke that idea of, if we saw a bear, it would typically evoke this fight, flight, or freeze response. So why are our brains so involved in this process? Well, we know from MRIs, CAT scans, wide awake neurosurgery, that deep inside the brain, there is this thing called the limbic system. And we've got this rational brain, which is sort of behind the forehead, right? And what we know is that the strong emotions originate in the limbic system. And if there's a fight or flight or freeze stimulus, the limbic system is activated and it releases cortisol and adrenaline and noradrenaline and things you've heard of. And what happens is that those chemicals, those neurotransmitters, drive our responses, our blood flow to our arms, our legs, our core, so that we can respond appropriately. It sort of acts like a light switch, limiting the rational brain. And so we call that an amygdala hijack when that happens, and it's not a physiological need to fight, flee, or freeze. Because if you are in an interpersonal situation, that typically is going to require your rational brain. And so we feel something first, and then we assign meaning to it. And it happens in a split second, and it often will happen when we're not aware. So others will talk about self-awareness, but self-awareness is a critical part. And the idea here is to think about, what are your hot buttons that might hijack you? Because a hijack occurs either because there's literally a physical threat, like car lights on a wet road driving home, where you go, oh, I better slow down, there's something ahead. But hijack also occurs when people do some of these underperforming behaviors, apathy, not responding, ignoring, so on and so forth. And the trick here is that if you develop your emotional intelligence skills, especially empathy, it can help you avoid a brain hijack and make you a better pilot of your emotions. So this is a model of EQ. There are lots of models out there. I use one particular model that is related to skills, and there are other models that are related to competencies. But all of the models have something in common, which is that it's a focus on self and others, basically, the self and social. And it's how aware are you of how you are functioning yourself, and how aware are you in relation to others? And then how do you manage yourself, and how do you manage those relationships with others? So I'm going to turn it over to Orshi, but you'll have an opportunity to also think about book recommendations for further learning. And I'm sure Megan can make sure that you get some of these recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Heather. And so Laura will actually be speaking next. That's all good. Speaking next about empathy.
I'm sorry.
Take it away, Laura.
Hopefully everyone can see my screen well. Wonderful. So I love that Heather called out an emotional intelligence model. And of course, we all have our favorites. This one's my favorite. And what I want to point out is that in almost every emotional intelligence model, there's empathy. And empathy ends up being the driver. It's the thing that makes the biggest difference when we think about emotional intelligence. In fact, it's sort of like seeing the majesty in the sky. Empathy is both a science and an art. We harness the power of it when we can transform relationships. We can both be sort of a star individually, right? I can be a superstar, and Heather pointed out, right, the star performers. But what we notice is when we use empathy, we move from being a star to a constellation. We learn how to work with people, with our connectivity. And then we can work through challenges and collaborate, innovate, and solve the world's dilemmas. So what is empathy? It's simply taking an active interest. And I want to sort of underline the word active. It's not passive, it's not circumstantial. It's actively being interested in openly receiving the perspective of someone else. I do love Daniel Goleman's quote here: the core skill in social awareness is empathy, sensing what others are thinking and feeling without them telling you in words. It isn't sympathy, it's not feeling with, and it's not joining them in the feeling. So it's not over-identifying. It's really noticing that someone else is having an emotion or having a reaction or having an experience, and you being able to identify like, oh, they're having that experience or having that emotion. I can identify that, I can understand it, I can see and I can hear them. So this becomes the connectivity. This becomes a tissue of relationships. And the question is, well, what then is the role of empathy? So think about it this way: when we increase our perspective, we also simultaneously increase the way we see possibility. It changes the narrative around a problem. We have openness to new solutions that we hadn't previously imagined or accepted. Think about it this way: we can actually apply empathy to ourselves. I can't see all of you, but I'm going to guess, I'm going to go on a limb here and say that some of you were not teleworkers before the pandemic, right? You became a teleworker. Some of you might have been, and that's awesome. And gosh, I have so much more appreciation for you now because you've increased my perspective on what it's like to work from home. And individually, when we are noticing that we're getting a new perspective or having an emotion, we can apply empathy to ourselves. It looks like self-compassion, self-care, trust. It creates a sense of positive orientation. When we do it interpersonally, when I understand your perspective, like I just said, I now understand and appreciate what it's like to be a teleworker. I never was a teleworker previously. I now have a better capacity, not only to deeply listen, but to take that listening and put it into a frame, into a construct and understanding. So it's no longer passive. I actually am activating and doing something with it. When we are in a space of empathy and actively seeking perspective, it also becomes a lubricant to conflict management and difficult conversations. It's a binder of trust. And when we have empathic organizations that actively seek the perspective of others, whatever those others are in the in and out groups, it's an organization that is more capable of collaboration, creating spaces of belonging, being open to change and growth. And in some ways, it creates a cascading collective of strength and possibilities. So empathy propagates more empathy. In that way, it is very generative. It creates the capability of bridging differences and revealing commonalities. So if you're not convinced about why to have empathy or how to think about it as an active perspective taking, I'd like us to think on this. It improves trust, collaboration, inclusion, influence. in negotiation. If I'm a researcher and I'm a scholarly practitioner, I think about when I have to coordinate different ideas, different models, different perspectives, and I can use empathy, it improves the outcomes of our collaboration. It improves the commitment and motivation of our work together. What's most interesting is that when we're seeking perspective, it actually becomes an act of inclusion. And I do mean inclusion with a capital I and a lowercase I. Consider the last 14 months, right? We all had to learn how to be good teleworkers. Most of us, some of us are essential workers, and I'm so grateful for you. For those of us who are not so essential and got to work from home in our home offices, we have experienced something that we're not soon to forget. And we've literally stepped into the shoes of our original teleworking colleagues. Now, think about what would it look like to intentionally reach out and understand what it looks like to be in someone else's shoes. We will find a new sense of appreciation. We might actually learn some new lessons. I think we can all agree that the last couple of months, years, the racial injustice and inequity showed us what it might be like to be a Black man or a Black woman or child in America. When we actively slow down to reflect on what we've learned by listening to the perspective of others, it is an act of inclusion. So the question becomes, how do I do that deliberately? What, do I need to wait until something happens to me? Do I need to wait till the next pandemic to actively be empathic? Do I need to wait for some other social injustice to really be reflective? And what I'd offer is no. In fact, when we intentionally seek perspective, we recognize it will never go back to being the way it was. The empathy ends up navigating our way forward. So taking that wide angle perspective and versus sort of the surround sound of everyday life, really thinking about what will it look like if I'm at the proverbial water cooler in the office versus I'm back at my home office? Am I seeking the perspective of the person in the home office? How do I do that with intention? How do I intentionally consider the spaces where I don't sit? We have new in and out groups that we've never really thought about actively before. I wonder how many of you are moms like me with kids at home and running amok just off camera. And that's a whole perspective. How many of you are single and may feel the isolation of being stuck at home? How many of you have a whole house full of dogs and cats and all kinds of creatures, big ones and small ones, and you're just waiting for the overwhelming sensation of being overly stimulated constantly to go away? These are all different perspectives. And what I hope we hold on to after this pandemic is that we intentionally think about, how do I include that perspective in my next decision making? We manage, we delegate, we research, we write, we lead, we onboard, we work through our projects. How do we make sure that all those things that we do, we're doing it through the lens of empathy, so actively seeking perspective? What would that look like? How would things change? What would you do differently? One of my pieces of work, one of my biggest pieces of work, is thinking about how will we make sure we never forget that we don't need a pandemic to be empathic? And it's a question I'll have for you. I'll leave it with you to think about that. Because when we bring that forward, when we are empathic in an emotionally intelligent and positive way, when we consider the perspectives of those around us who have a different experience, then we create spaces of belonging. And we want people to fully show up. We want them to bring their whole self so that we can innovate and solve problems and serve people, so that we have vigilance around creating cultures that people feel safe, heard, and seen. That's the work of empathy. Thank you for your time. Orshi, I'll turn it over to you.
Can you all see my screen? Thank you. Thank you very much. So today I would like to talk to you about I would like to give you some practical tips and advice on how to improve on your emotional intelligence. And it starts with self-awareness. And what I mean by self-awareness is, ideally you want to know more about yourself, who you are as a person, what your feelings are like. So as a practical tip, it's important to identify what your top 5 core values are. And if you haven't thought about this, try thinking of your personal life and how your personal life was shaped. What family did you grow up in? What was your educational experience? your cultural heritage. What are some of the positive or negative experiences in your life? And write them down, because by writing them down, you will be able to think a lot more about yourself and who you are as a person. You also want to think of your purpose in life. What do you really want to accomplish as an individual? And in general, when you think of your workplace, you want to know what your strengths and areas for improvements are. So as an advice, in your workplace, you probably want to think and make a list of your core technical skills, as well as on the soft skills. What are some of the skills you are good at, and what are some of the skills you would like to focus on? What we do at Research Square, we basically provide an assessment tool called the Strengths Finder to all of our employees. And we emphasize more on the strengths, but it helps us a lot when we do cross-functional projects to understand each individual strengths and what they can bring to the table. Also, you can think of your work style, and there are many tools out there like the Myers-Briggs assessment or the DISC assessment you can do. At Research Square, we have not done that just yet across the entire organization, but certain departments have already implemented DISC and Myers-Briggs. We also provide a 360-degree evaluation for all of our leaders and managers. And we do that once a year, and this is a great opportunity for all of our leaders and managers to understand what they are really good at and what are some of the areas they would like to focus on. For those individuals who are not in a leadership position, we provide a peer review, which is similar to the 360-degree review, but employees get feedback from their peers. Once a year, we do a performance review, which we call People Analyzer, and we ask all of our employees to evaluate themselves on our core values and how much they believe in those. There's another test I've listed here. It's called the fascination test. And this is not a popular test out there, but the reason I've put that down because I've recently done that, and it gives you a perspective how you are perceived by others. Many times, we have conception who we are and what we are really good at, but the fascination test can be an eye-opener how others perceive you, and that can also give you additional awareness what you might want to work on. So moving on to the next one, self-regulation. I'm sure you must have been in situations at work when somebody pushed your hot button. And in situations like this, you either attack or blame the other person, or you tend to take it out on someone later on. So that's called the flight or fight response. And others tend to withdraw and they don't say a word, and they completely shut down and they just don't do anything. And ideally, you want to find a solution, an ideal solution when you don't fight, but you don't flight either. And what you can do, you can, in a situation at work, you can probably just take a few seconds, take a big deep breath before you respond. So that is one technique you can do. But you can also do some journaling after work and think of the situation, what happened, how you ended up responding, and come up with a solution how you will behave next time, maybe differently. Ideally, you want to identify some of your triggers. We all know that we have triggers. And if you identify them and maybe write them down on a piece of paper and think of a proactive solution moving forward, that can also help you. We have implemented a new benefit called the Calm app at Research Square, which is a meditation app. And it not only provides meditation, but they provide music. They also provide self-reflection exercises and even physical exercises, just stretching for a few minutes throughout the day. And we felt like that this was an important benefit to implement during the pandemic, because in general, it was super, super difficult to work from home and being isolated. And we felt that this particular benefit would be useful to all of our employees. In general, when you think of self-regulation, if you exercise on a regular basis, if you have sufficient sleep, if you eat healthy, and also if you incorporate fun into your everyday life, you will probably be able to keep your emotions at bay. And at Research Square, we usually have a company-wide meetings 3 times a year. And just before the meeting, we do all sorts of outings. And some of the outings we do are yoga exercises, meditation, but we also incorporate game nights. Last time we did Mario Kart games, and lots of our employees enjoy those. So awareness of others is another topic. Laura talked about empathy, and we think we would like all of our managers to focus a lot on that. And because of that, we have implemented a coaching communities of practice at work. So we encourage all of our managers to attend these sessions. And we do talk a lot about listening skills. We do talk about empathy. And this is what we provide to our employees. But also we have various Slack channels. And the Slack channels are great for employees to talk about their problems. Most popular Slack channel these days are the parenting Slack channel, and lots of people are asking help that, hey, what do you think I should do? And so many of our colleagues step in and give advice to each other, which I find really, really helpful. At our customer service team constantly gets cross-cultural sensitivity training. We consider this very important because most of our clients are from overseas. So we want to understand how our clients want to be treated. During the pandemic, we have implemented several new programs. One of them was the virtual lunch session. We wanted our employees to connect with each other because they are isolated at home, and we wanted them to talk about their personal life and have deeper conversations with each other. We have also implemented a Hangout with the Leader program. So leaders are able to talk to employees and ask how things are going. We also wanted to establish a two-way communication between employees and the leadership team. And we also incorporated some fun activities such as the virtual dog show. Lots of people enjoyed that. They brought their dogs. They showed us some tricks. We had lots of fun. During the pandemic, on the top of the COVID leave, the company also provided 1 week off for any COVID-related leave, which was extra leave that we didn't have before. And the company is on a DEI journey. We just formed our DEI program last year, and we are still working on that, but we have several sub-pillars such as the inclusion group and the equity group, and we do focus on inclusive training programs as well as implementing employee resource groups. And the last one is relationship management. We want all of our leaders to be inspirational, and we want to incorporate trust at Research Square. And trust starts with communication. So we want to make sure that we communicate with our employees on a regular basis. We provide all of our new hires our 3-year vision. We want them to understand where we are going. We also talk about our company rocks, which is basically our company goals. So each year we have our annual goals. We do talk about that. And we also talk about our financial results. So people, in case they have any questions on our financials, they are able to see those. Each meeting, we start with some professional and personal good news. And the reason we do that, because we want to keep people at ease, and we want them to share their personal stories and establish trust at a deeper level before we start talking about more difficult conversations or issues and topics. We have a mentorship program at Research Square, and for now we only provided this for one particular group, but as a DEI initiative, we plan to include the mentorship program across the board, because we want all of our employees to get equal chance to to educate themselves further and be better in their job. And we definitely we believe in a constant learning culture. So we do provide regular training courses via LinkedIn Learning as well. And we also have internal programs such as the Emerging Leader Program and the Leadership Bootcamp. And part of these programs, we talk about change management, we talk about conflict management, also how to establish trust, how to build empathy. And these topics are all in this program. And last but not least, I feel like that I should talk about our core values. We have about 6 core values, but I want to emphasize 3 in particular we have in place. One of them is the enabling the success of others. The other is show trust and vulnerability. And the third one is to embrace and fuel change. I believe that all of these core values are related to emotional intelligence. And when I joined the company, I was really pleased to see these, because this way we can emphasize and enforce emotional intelligence at Research Square. So I've provided you lots of tips today, and I hope that today at least you can choose 1 or 2 nuggets and takeaway item and try to incorporate and include it into your everyday life. And it's going to take some while to build your emotional intelligence, but if you are consistent and if you just choose 1 at a time and take 1 step at a time, you will be able to get there, because building your emotional intelligence is useful not only in your personal life, but also in your professional life as well.
Thank you so much, Orshi, and thank you to all the speakers. I think you've given us a lot of food for thought. And I welcome all of our participants to go ahead and start adding those questions to the Q&A feature. And I've got more than a few here. And some new ones based off of the presentations we just heard. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right in while y'all are sharing questions. So Laura, I want to start off with you. I think you made just a really compelling case for empathy and how just perspective seeking can allow us to innovate and just be collaborative and do all the things I think we ideally want to be able to do at work. So often that means hearing uncomfortable feedback about our own performance. So do you have any tips for how to stay present and fight the urge to give into defensiveness?
That's a wonderful question. I love that. I think it's a combination of factors. I think one, being open to receiving feedback is part of our desire to achieve success, right? And which is on the self side of the model for emotional intelligence. It's really that self-regulation. Do I want to hear this information as a mechanism to grow and get better? Or do I want to hear this information as a way to feel worse about myself? Right? So I think first it's just a realization that feedback, unless it's given with ill intent, typically I find 99% of the time, it's given with the intent to grow and support somebody. So how do we get in the mindset of saying, how can I be open, actively open to hearing another perspective that may not match my own, but it's going to help me grow? And that mindset, I think, is what's necessary. So having a positive orientation and focus on the achievement or the growth that comes from the feedback.
And I think your presentation also hit on the need to just take time and slow down. So I guess as a follow-up, could you build on some tips for slowing down? Because I feel like I know when I have Slack, I have Teams, I have email, I got my phone, it's like,
it never ends. It's relentless communication, right? Yeah. So at RTI, we have a leadership program called Lead Experience Advancing Development. And one of the major elements of our program is focused on reflection journaling. And I'll tell you, having to ask people who are grown adults to say, do you remember when you had a journal, like maybe had a little lock on the front of it, right? And people's orientation, like slowing down. Do you know how much I have to do, woman? I don't know if I have time to slow down. But the research keeps panning out and showing us that when we write things down, I mean, you can imagine, remember grad school, perhaps when we took notes, we have better recall. So when we stop, and I love, Orshi, your comment about breathing. There's so much great research around the power of the breath to bring us back to ourselves, to slow us down, to bring our heart, head, and sort of breath altogether and really think about, what is my intention right now? What did I learn just now? What did I hear? Or I like to do this in the forward-looking way. In this next meeting, how do I want to show up? What do I want to practice? How will I actively seek perspective? Whose perspective am I not open to right now? Why? And writing that down as an act of both learning, but also opening yourself up, is what we tend to teach. And it can be as short as 5 minutes a day. I tend to think about, where are the moments where I have the most learning to do? I don't know about you. Do you have a meeting that you hate going to? I mean, we all have one. I won't tell. But I feel like there's a meeting sometimes in a week that I don't like going to, and I have to ask myself, how will I show up in this meeting as my best self, even though the self that doesn't want to be there is on my shoulder. And writing that down and setting a goal for how I want to show up is part of that work.
Yeah, that's really insightful and great reminders. I'm sure we all remember taking notes physically. It's a great reminder to go back to that. So I see we have 2 questions in the chat in the Q&A feature here. So Heather, I want to throw the first one to you. So Tricia asked, how can people managers help support their teams in developing their EQ?
It's an important question. I think that part of it is starting with self. I think a lot of managers send their employees to training. And I've done training for many years. And what I hear is, well, it's fine. I know I need to be here, but my boss needs to be here too. So I think that, we send employees to charm school, hoping it'll fix them, when we don't realize that our influence is better if we've also taken part in some of that. If we also are being self-reflective, if we're trying to increase our own self-awareness. So I think part of that effort to reinforce it with employees is them seeing your own journey, and that you're doing something along those lines. I have more power to influence you if I'm walking the talk than if I'm just directing you to do it. So that's one. The other is looking for ways, having resources. And so Orshi has just given all of us some great things and some new things that I'm going to be doing some homework on to see how I can incorporate them. But having resources that you can share with your employees. I have a reading list I give people. I have strategies about empathy. I have strategies about self-awareness. Having some tools that you can give people that encourage them to do that. And then being willing to be a sounding board and actually work with employees to practice the skills. Malcolm Gladwell has done a lot of great work on talking about what does it take for something to become a habit. And there's discrepancy over, the 10,000 hour mark. But the point is that if you want to change your behavior, it doesn't happen immediately. And our anti-emotional intelligence behaviors become our autopilots. And so in order for something to become an autopilot that's an effective behavior, that's an effective emotional intelligence skill, we have to use it. And we have to be willing to be uncomfortable. And so managers being willing to be uncomfortable and vulnerable themselves, but supporting employees to practice skills. I equate it to, and probably lots of people listening to my voice right now probably have never driven a stick shift, right? But if you've ever driven a vehicle with the stick shift, then you know that the very first time you do it, you grind the gears, you stall, you do the herky jerky. Well, learning emotional intelligence skills is a lot that way. And some of us are too uncomfortable to do that. And so the biggest thing a manager can do is support an employee to be in that awkward skill acquisition and practice phase, and work with them and coach them and give them a safe space to try it out.
Yeah, those are some great tips. And it makes me think about, we should be fighting that kind of perfectionist urge of always getting it right, or always expecting, ourselves to always get it right and everyone else as well. And kind of shift towards that growth mindset, like you're saying. So Orshi, we have a question for you in the chat. Let me just go ahead and read it out here from Lindsay. So she says, they say that they would love to hear more about Orshi's leadership program slash emerging leader program. How are people chosen? What is the time requirement? Are there measurable goals that each person should achieve or accomplish during the program?
Yes, yes. So we ask our employees to apply. We don't necessarily choose some people, although we had situations when we asked managers to identify high potential employees to be part of the Emerging Leader Program. So most of the time we have internal applications, and then a committee decides who can actually go to the training program. It's usually for about 12 weeks, and each session has a particular topic. So, one day we talk about change management, the next time we talk about conflict resolution. And yes, they have actually tasks to do. So at the end of each session, they have homework to do. And the following time, they need to come back and they talk about how they implemented some of the techniques or some of what they have learned in the previous session. And we also assign mentors to the people who are participating in the Emerging Leader Program, because probably they have questions throughout the program, and we ask experienced leaders to be mentors for the mentees, and that's how basically the program runs. The Leadership Bootcamp is a shorter program, and it's only for about 4 weeks, and we usually end up doing that program because so many people would like to participate in the Emerging Leader Program that whoever were not able to get into that program, we usually end up doing a shorter version of the Leadership Bootcamp before they can participate in the Emerging Leader Program.
Thank you. Thanks for that response. So Laura, I think I may have missed that you wanted to piggyback on something Heather had said, so I just wanted to throw it back to you for a second.
Yeah, it was really just a small build. I loved everything Heather said. It was spot on. And I think there's a way to do it holistically, not just dyadically. So I think what Heather offered dyadically makes perfect sense. And then as a manager, what we teach our managers at RTI is also set a team expectation and set team norms that are grounded in emotional intelligence, right? Team norms like have positive intent, listen before you react, slow down before you make a decision, gain multiple perspectives before you come to a conclusion or you finish a project, right? So it's built into the culture, and then it's easier to practice because what we know in human behavior is we do what we're incentivized to do. And then we also are herd animals. So if everyone else is doing that thing, then I want to do it too, because I don't want FOMO. I don't want fear of missing out on the thing that I'm expected to do. So that sort of amplifies and sort of ignites people's willingness and energy into doing emotional intelligence as a practice.
And I've heard about the RTI norms a little bit from Annie. I wonder how are they communicated? How does that look practically?
Yeah, so a couple different ways. So we've got new managers that come on board. There's a new manager sort of process or program that is a couple sessions long. We also have what we call management toolkits that we offer within our leadership development program at large. In that, one of them is all around culture setting. So how do you set a culture? And it's based on the emotional intelligence model. Our leadership program is based on the ESCI model. And so we give people sample norms, we give people sample documents. We have an expectation at the organization that when you have your team, you have quarterly conversations individually that are based on development and growth, and you have annual conversations based on goal setting for the whole team, as well as individual goal setting, again, based not just on we've got X project with X client and we got to get X thing done, but also how will I grow and develop professionally, not just on a ladder, but also through skills. Broadening my skill base, broadening my competence base. So those are some of the ways that we have set those expectations. And then back in the day when we were in the office, I noticed that teams that have like their norms list taped to the wall or taped in their areas. Now I know several teams are picking up the habit of starting a meeting by flashing the norms like on the top of the PowerPoint. It's the first slide. Like, hey, let's just remember these are the team norms that we've set. And it's not meeting norms, it's really team behavior norms. So going back to listening, seeking perspective, staying open to ideas, being clear and kind, giving each other difficult feedback, like that kind of set up at the top of a meeting virtually, since we can't see it in the office anymore, as an example.
I think that's a fantastic idea, and it might be something I bring to my team and back to J&J. So it looks like we have a question from Anna in the chat, and I think this is a really timely question and something that I'm sure we're all thinking of. Do you have some tips for practicing empathy and inclusion with introverts, especially during remote work, with whom it can be more difficult to read feelings and perspectives? So let's see. Orshi, or would you like to take this one?
Of course, I can. I think it's easier for introverts because we tend to listen. I'm an introvert, so I can speak from personal experience. So it's more about, listening to the other person, and even just not saying a word, just nod and yes, I'm hearing you, or just even ask open-ended questions like tell me more, and just let the other person speak. And if you are not sure how to respond, then paraphrase what the other person was telling you, and just paraphrase, and then the conversation will flow after that. So I think it's easier to do that, but obviously you ideally want to have the camera on when you speak to someone, especially in a virtual setting, so you can at least see their face and read their emotions. That would be my suggestion.
And Laura, I wonder if you had any other suggestions to follow on with?
Yeah, I'm not an introvert. I'm certainly not an introvert. And half of my team is, so at least 5 people on my team, maybe 6, are introverts or maybe ambiverts. And what I've actually noticed is I ask them how they want, seek perspective, right? I ask them how they want to be included. I ask them what it looks like when they feel a sense of inclusion and belonging, and I try to adapt my own management style for their individual needs. Half of my team, we are presenting a lot of the day, so we're sort of sick of being on video camera. I'm tired of looking at myself. I don't know about the rest of you. So we end up getting on the phone and going for a walk and talk, and I ask them questions about their life, and they don't, as introverts, they don't always like to talk about it. So then I ask them, what is it that would bring them some energy or some joy or some what they need in that moment, and we focus the conversation that way. So I find that it's for me best to be really individualistic with the person that I'm working with when I want to provide empathy. Like, what is it that they need from me, and how can I show up for them, and then do that, follow through consistently, and not get lazy and fall into my own patterns of talking too much.
If I could just add something practical, I'm an extrovert, although I've found that during the pandemic, I've been much more comfortable with my quietness than much. It was shocking to me to figure out that I could be a happy, quiet extrovert. But I find that when working with people who are more introverted, that it's really critical to give them advance notice. If you have critical questions that need to be answered, letting them know in advance what those questions are is really important, because that gives them time to think and prepare responses. If there's, I have an agenda, even if it's just a one-on-one meeting, I say, well, here's what I want to think about in our discussion. I let people know in advance, which actually helps extroverts not just say the first thing that comes to mind. It actually gives them an opportunity to prepare as well. And I would say, probably from a leadership perspective, one of the most important things I teach leaders all the time, that your job is to not speak first and often. Your job is to speak least and last, because if you're really doing an effective job perspective taking, you can't do that if you've laid out everything that you want to say and all you do is ask for a reaction to it. Ideally, if you want to influence and pull in this, and this helps pulling in the introverts, but again, it also pulls in, it increases the quality of everybody's contributions. If as the leader, you're taking perspective first, you're then summarizing, as Orshi talked about, and then you're adding to what your perspective is. And what's really interesting is that more often than not, that the perspectives that you are going to share have now been shared by others, and they feel validated, and now they're going to be encouraged to speak up more often, because you're not just the talking head in the room, and giving out everything, just seeking validation. And I don't mean that in a pejorative way, but I think a lot of leaders think they need to lay out the agenda first and get a reaction to it. And I actually believe it's the reverse. And then that pulls in people who are more introverted, but it increases the quality for everybody.
Yeah, I think that's a really great and kind of just another spin on what Laura was saying, how showing empathy creates more empathy and just facilitates collaboration. And I think that's just a really excellent way to put that. So we've talked a lot about leadership so far, but I wonder if we could switch gears just a little bit to talk about kind of from the employee perspective, how we can talk. I know we talked about journaling and some other things, but I wonder, Orshi, if there's some other tips we could pass along to employees, how we can maybe support employee-to-employee interactions, or how employees can lift each other up.
We have a buddy program at work, which I did not share, but new hires tend to get a buddy so they can talk about their problems with that person, or even bring up issues that they don't necessarily want to bring up with the manager. So we provide that option as well. But besides that, I'm a strong believer in continuous learning. So when new hires start with us, we provide them access to LinkedIn Learning. And there are lots of training courses related to emotional intelligence, if this is the particular area employees are interested in. But besides that, we also get together when it's not pandemic. We always have lunch every other week with the team members in our Durham office, which we miss, unfortunately, but this is what we do. We want to make sure, and we even meet after hours. We have regular social events. So even in this virtual setting, we did set up social outings, and we get together and we just have some fun, or even just an everyday conversation, what's going on in our employees' personal life.
And are there opportunities for employees to I don't know, take part in the company programming, or propose, carry out initiatives?
Yeah, so right now the DEI program is very popular. We started with, I think it was 15 people, and now we have like 23 members, and more people would like to join the program because they feel that they can make a difference and they can make an impact. And I feel that we will have even more members, because as we are forming our employee resource groups, we are looking for additional volunteers, people who can actually lead those groups and come up with additional sessions, additional learning opportunities on that particular ERG group within the company.
And Laura, I wondered, are there ERGs at RTI?
Oh my, yes. We have about 12 ERGs and something like 3,600 employees participate in our ERGs. The two biggest are Women Achieving Leadership Success and Black Employee Resource Groups, and the Young Professional Resource Group. So those three tend to, they have a lot of employees, and they're employee led. They have executive sponsors, each one. They have a cycle that people vote in and out, or apply to be the leader in and out every 9 months to a year. We also have a DE&I council that all the leaders of the ERGs sit on, as well as some executive team members and members of my team and other teams that support that group on their learning journeys, on their growth journeys. We have a really robust mentor program within the ERGs, and then at the corporate level and at unit levels. So we're mature in the employee resource group space, but what's most exciting is just how much they do on their own. It's just, there's not a lot of corporate push there. There's just a lot of fueled passion to make it happen. It's wonderful.
Yeah, I think that's a great reminder that our employees, sometimes they don't need leadership. They're their own leaders, and they have so much to contribute to everything that a company does, and they make the company what it is, right? And to a large extent. So
I think it also gives people a place to practice all the skills we're talking about. There's so many employees that join employee resource groups that are individual contributors, high functioning, wonderful individual contributors in their job. And then they get to play a chair role or lead an activity or sit as a leader of the ERG. And that creates a space for them to grow skill sets that they wouldn't have had the opportunity to grow otherwise, and gain perspective of what it's like to sit in that seat. It's not as easy. What do they say? The grass isn't greener on the other side. It's just different manure. Like, that is the reality of leadership sometimes for people. So getting that perspective and realizing that it's tough on that side too. Yeah,
absolutely. And that'll only, I think, support empathy among employees and leadership, and et cetera. So we're nearing the end of our time. So I wonder if we have any closing thoughts about carrying empathy and compassion forward. And I think we already talked a lot about supporting equity and inclusion going forward. Hopefully not needing another pandemic to do that. So if we could, if I could have a volunteer to close things out, that would be great. Or two.
I would just say, as somebody who is, I on the Myers-Briggs have 0F, like literally 0F. And on the emotional intelligence assessments, I am empathy challenged. And I've done 360 now multiple times. When I first did it, I realized that I thought I was faking good, and I, of course, wasn't. And so I've worked really hard on developing empathy, and I'm a role model for the fact that you can do it. I do it imperfectly. I probably will be working on this the rest of my life. But what I have learned, and this is why everybody needs to care about this, is that empathy is the currency of influence. And all of us are trying to influence, even if it's influencing your dog or your cat to do something. Everybody is trying to influence every single day. And I didn't appreciate that. I did not appreciate that empathy was so important. I was very task-oriented. I'm incredibly analytical. I'm all about checking off a list. I'm a woman with their hair on fire all the time to get my list done. But I didn't appreciate that empathy was essential for my success. And that would be one of the things I would leave everybody with to think about. If you didn't think it was important, you're mistaken. It's incredibly important. And I am the first one to admit this, because I didn't value it. And now I teach it.
I think that's a fantastic note to leave things on, that we can turn it around if we feel like scoring lower on any of those assessments. So thank you to everyone for participating in today's event. Many thanks, of course, to our panelists and to the Raleigh-Durham Regional Committee for organizing the session. Everyone will receive an evaluation via email, and we encourage you to provide feedback and to help us determine topics for future events in this series. Don't miss out the next couple months on the SSP calendar. We have 2 events coming up here: Charting a New Course from Chaos to Innovation, and Open Access, Understanding the Mission, the Models and Mindsets. Great. So I also want to ask everyone to please consider a donation to SSP's Generations Fund, which provides sustainable funding for SSP's fellowship and mentoring programs through an endowment. A community is only as strong as its next generation of leaders. So today's discussion was recorded, and all registrants will be sent a link to the recording when it's posted on the SSP website. So this concludes our session today. Thank you so much.